I am a colonizer. And I am a decolonizer. And we are fighting! I have 48 attack helicopters, 2,200 tanks, 250 jet fighters, and 170,000 active military personnel. And I don't have food, water, electricity, or fuel. I have human rights. And I don't. I have hang gliders and bulldozers. I took their home. My home was taken. I'm backed by the world's greatest empire in human history, and I live in an open-air concentration camp. I'm in constant violation of international law and face no accountability ever. I'm recognized as the single greatest humanitarian crisis on Earth. I have completely encircled my enemy by land, air, and sea and have them hermetically sealed off from the rest of the world. And about half of my population of 2 million is children. I constantly violate ceasefire agreements, and I uphold ceasefire agreements until they're broken. Both sides are bad. I'm very smart. Actually, Hamas started this whole thing. Remember October 7th? Actually, that's wrong. Before October 7th, Israeli security forces killed 248 Palestinians, and 40 of them were children, and that was just this year. And if you want to go back further than that, we can look at the recent history of war crimes committed by the Israeli government. Operation Protective Edge in 2014, Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012, Operation Cast Lead in 2009. Yeah, but you don't mention why Cast Lead happened. Hamas fired rockets into Israel. And that was because Israel broke the ceasefire agreement they had on November 4th, 2008, while the entire world was in euphoria over the United States electing its first black president, Barack Obama. Israel used the opportunity to break the ceasefire agreement and raid Gaza and kill Palestinians. By the Israeli foreign minister's own words at the time, this strategy of breaking the ceasefire was to preempt Hamas into an attack which they could use as a pretext for a much larger invasion. The fact that you don't see that is kind of baffling to me. Well, you're leaving out a lot of context. You gotta go back further than that. To 1967? Yeah, let's go back to 1967, when Israel started a preemptive war against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and took more land from Palestine, further enclosing Palestinians into the Gaza Strip. They illegally occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in what has been formally condemned ever since 1967 as an illegal occupation in violation of international law, unilaterally condemned by the World Court, the UN, the Red Cross, the Geneva Conventions, worldwide consensus. The majority of countries in the world all call on Israel to return to its pre-June 1967 borders. Yeah, but you're missing more context. You gotta go back to 1948. Okay, let's go back to 1948. In 1948, Zionists extirpated about 1 million Palestinians from their homes and forced them to relocate to the Gaza Strip. Today, about 70% of all Gazans are considered refugees from the 1948 expulsion. This predictably sparked a war. Yes, when you have colonial powers coming into a territory that does not belong to them and forcibly removing people from their land, it tends to get violent. Yeah, but you're missing context. What about before Christ? Invoking the Bible as an excuse to ethnically cleanse a population from its territory is a baby-brained middle school argument. Biblical rights have absolutely no status in the world today. No one can say that 2,000 years ago, this is my story of what happened, therefore I get to take this land from these people. Tell them to take the safe route. Take the safe route. Okay, now bomb the safe route. Bombing safe route. Tell them to go to the refugee center. Attention Palestinians, go to the refugee center. Now bomb the refugee center. Bombing refugee center? Oh, what? Looks like some of them are getting into ambulances. Bomb the ambulances. Copy. They're on their way to the hospital. Bomb the hospital. Bombing hospital. Okay, now tell them there's an escape route south to Egypt. Attention Palestinians, head south to Egypt. Okay, now bomb the escape route. Figured that. And again. Already on it? And again. What are we gonna tell the press? Beheaded babies. What a tragedy, that savage attack on poor Israel. Yes, and this is what happens when you have an all-powerful imperial state violently colonizing land that does not belong to them. Oh! So you're let me ask you something. Do you celebrate the 4th of July? Of Course. So you celebrate war and violence against an imperial colonizer. Hey, that's different. Yeah, the only difference is that Israel is treating Palestine far worse than King George III ever treated the American colony. England was just taxing them without representing them, outlawing slavery, and telling settlers like George Washington they couldn't colonize native land west of Tennessee. Violence is never the answer. Well, that makes you a hypocrite then, because you still support and celebrate violence. The only thing that you're missing, either intentionally or unintentionally, is whose violence you support and whose violence you condemn. It is a common feature among reactionaries to always dismiss and disregard the violence meted out by security forces of an all-powerful imperial state, and always condemn the violence committed in retaliation against the stability of the status quo. You don't actually condemn violence, you just don't want to be uncomfortable. Okay, but do they have to be so violent? Brother, they live in the world's largest concentration camp ever. That's respected Israeli sociologist Baruch Kimmerly's words, not mine. They live in an open-air prison. That's former conservative Prime Minister David Cameron's words, not mine. Gaza's whole civilization has been destroyed. I'm not exaggerating. That's not my words. That's UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Mary Robinson's words. Gaza is 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. It is home to 2.2 million people. Half of them are children. It is among the most densely populated places on Earth, more dense than Tokyo. They have no economy. In fact, 90% of their economy, if it can even be called that, is international aid, aka foreign handouts. They have been under a harsh, repressive blockade for decades now. Nothing and no one goes into Gaza, and nothing and no one goes out of Gaza. Only in the rarest of exceptions. 97% of the water in Gaza is poison. Half of the population of Gaza is legally labeled by human rights organizations as extremely food insecure. They are kept in perpetual hunger, kept on the brink of starvation, since starving them outright is considered taboo. For most of the people in Gaza, this is all they have ever known. They have never stepped foot outside of Gaza. They were born into it. Born into a concentration camp. The same way that slaves were born into slavery. Absolutely no hope. To make everything even worse, periodically a diabolical, psychopathic, violent regime invades Gaza in a murderous, high-tech bombing campaign and military raid, killing thousands of civilians, leveling entire neighborhoods. These episodic invasions are what is considered by Israeli strategic planners officially as mowing the lawn. Imagine for a second that you and everyone that you know is referred to as a lawn which needs to be mowed. Imagine the degradation, the humiliation that you would experience, the sense of dread, the sense of hopelessness, the sense that there is no way out. And oh, by the way, every time one of these high-tech military campaigns invades your land, the international community holds its nose and looks the other way. When these high-tech operations come to an end and Palestinians are left to pick up the pieces and rebuild their land, guess who blockades all the materials needed to rebuild the land? They watch their brothers die, their sisters die, their nieces and their nephews, their grandfathers and their grandmothers, and no one is coming to help them. Imagine for a second the rage that might build up inside of you if you were one of these people. You know what, I would, but I am late for brunch. Do the Israelis not have the right to defend themselves? Do the Palestinians not have the right to liberate themselves? Killing civilians is not liberating yourself. It's uncalled for. If you truly believe that, then where is your criticism of the Israeli government, which has killed exponentially far more innocent civilians in its 56-year-long illegal occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? This isn't an NFL football game. This isn't an even playing field. One side completely, utterly, unilaterally dominates the other. Economically, militarily, socially, culturally. There is no comparison between the two. It cannot be said with a straight face that the Israeli government is trying to liberate itself. Rather, it is trying to maintain its vice-like grip on a besieged population comprised mostly of children. I don't condone the killing of civilians. You do condone the killing of civilians. Palestinian civilians. You say you don't condone, but you only condemn when Palestine does it. The truth is, you do condone the killing of civilians. That is not true. After every high-tech murderous campaign conducted by the Israeli government over the past 2 decades, Operation Rainbow, Operation Summer Rains, Operation Autumn Clouds, Operation Hot Winter, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Days of Penitence, Operation Protective Edge, where were you? Did you even know about these operations? Were they even seriously reported in the press? It is your silence that gives permission. You know what the press wants you to know. You say what the press wants you to say, because you don't dig deep enough. Let's do a thought experiment. You've already heard, shortly after October 7th, the Israeli President Isaac Herzog say publicly that there is no such thing as innocent civilians in Gaza, meaning that civilians in Gaza are no different than enemy combatants and will be treated as targets. Now, if the Palestinians indeed live in a military dictatorship as Israeli officials claim, and if the charge is that the Palestinian civilians somehow bear the brunt of responsibility for the actions of the Hamas leadership, then what can be said about the democracy of Israel, who carries out murderous high-tech bombing campaigns, 90% of which its own public, its own civilians, Israeli civilians, support? Are they not also complicit in the actions of their government? Why is this logic only applied to Palestinians and not Israelis? There's actually a stronger case that says that Israeli civilians are complicit in the actions of their government, being that it is a Western-style liberal democracy and not a military dictatorship. I gotta go, I'm late for brunch. Israel has a right to defend itself. Actually, no. Legally, they don't. They are an occupying force in violation of international law. Thus, they forgo the right to self-defense. Israel is not an occupying force. They withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Wrong again. Legally, they are. And the UN General Assembly, the International Committee for the Red Cross, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice all agree that Israel is still the occupying force in Gaza. Even though it withdrew its troops in 2005, it still has complete, unanimous, and unilateral control over the Gaza Strip. Thus, it is still the occupying force. Well, even if that's true, occupying forces still have rights. See the rules of belligerent occupation as outlined in the International Committee of the Red Cross, which you just cited. Israel still has rights as the belligerent occupier. But rights entail responsibilities. Israel is not fulfilling its responsibilities as a belligerent occupier. Thus, once again, it forgoes its right to self-defense. See the rules of belligerent occupation. The only people who have a right to self-defense and a right to use violence are the people in the occupied territories. Their violence, whether symbolic or strategic, whether indiscriminate or precise, is considered neutral by international law, and thus it cannot be condemned. I don't get it. Occupying territories is illegal. Resistance to occupying forces is legal. These people are facing annihilation, they are facing extirpation, they are facing expulsion, they are facing ethnic cleansing, they are facing being genocided. They have every right to exercise any and all forms of resistance that they possibly can, whether it's strategic or symbolic, whether it's indiscriminate or precise.
Nixon ordered Cambodian genocide. Clinton sent cruise missiles to Sudan, people died. Obama gave the orders to do drone strikes.